The snow began the way snow often does in old places, without ceremony. No thunder, no warning. Just a soft, patient falling that seemed to hush the world as it touched it. At the edge of the valley stood Ravenwood Station, a small wooden platform with a sloped roof and a single iron clock that had been running a little slow for years. The clock ticked anyway, faithful and stubborn, its hands moving even when no one was watching. Tonight, the station lantern burned low, its light turning the falling snow into drifting gold. The last train out was scheduled for midnight. It had always been a quiet route, one track cutting through forests and frozen fields, carrying mail, supplies, and the occasional traveler who needed to leave before winter closed the passes. By late December, most people were already settled in, fires stocked, doors sealed. Only those who truly had to go stood on the platform this night. Inside the small waiting room, the stove crackled softly. Its warmth smelled of old iron and pine wood, a scent that clung to coats and memories. Boots were lined neatly by the wall, slowly drying. No one spoke loudly. No one needed to. Outside, snow gathered on the rails in thin white lines, filling the dark spaces between steel and wood. The track disappeared into the forest like a thought unfinished. Elias Harrow, the station keeper, stepped out onto the platform and pulled his coat tighter. He had been opening and closing this station for 37 winters. His hands knew the motions without instruction. Check the signal lamp, brush the snow from the steps, listen. He always listened. Tonight the valley sounded different. Snow has a way of changing sound. It softens distance, bends echoes, makes the world feel smaller and closer all at once. Elias noticed how even the river beyond the trees seemed quieter, as if it too were waiting. He looked down the track, squinting into the falling white. The train should have been visible by now, at least a faint glow, a whisper of steam. There was nothing. Behind him, the waiting room door opened gently. A woman stepped out, wrapped in a dark wool shawl, her breath forming small clouds. She carried only one bag, carefully mended at the corners. "Has it passed the ridge yet?" she asked, her voice low, as if afraid to disturb the snow. Elias shook his head slowly. "Not yet," he said, "but it will come." He had said those words many times before. Tonight, they felt heavier. The wind shifted, and snow began to fall thicker, larger flakes now, steady and determined. They settled into Elias's hat brim, into the grooves of the platform boards, into the spaces where footsteps had been only moments before. Midnight was still an hour away. The valley held its breath. And somewhere far beyond the forest, the last train out was moving slowly, carefully, toward a place that might not let it leave again. The snow kept falling. The waiting room filled the way quiet places always do, slowly, without anyone noticing the moment it became full. There were 7 souls in total, counting Elias. A young postal clerk sat closest to the stove, his gloves laid flat on his knees, as if he were afraid they might try to leave without him. He had been assigned to the lowland route only 3 months earlier, and winter still surprised him. Every few minutes he glanced at the window, watching snow erase the world inch by inch. Near the back wall, an older couple shared a bench. They leaned toward each other, not speaking, their shoulders touching lightly. Years ago, they might have talked through every delay and uncertainty. Now silence felt like agreement. The woman's knitting rested unfinished in her lap, a single mitten waiting patiently for its twin. The woman in the shawl, Mara, stood apart, gazing at a faded timetable pinned beside the door. She had read it many times already. The ink was worn thin, where countless fingers had traced the same question. When can I leave? Elias moved among them quietly, tending the stove, checking the clock, offering nods instead of words. He had learned that in moments like this, people didn't want reassurance. They wanted steadiness, something that stayed the same even as the world outside disappeared. Snow pressed against the windows now, blurring the outlines of trees and fences until the valley seemed to shrink into the room itself. The glass glowed softly from the lantern outside, as if the station were floating inside a snow globe gently shaken by unseen hands. Someone cleared their throat. "Snow's coming down heavier than last year," the postal clerk said, half to himself. Elias answered without looking up. "It does that sometimes," he said, "when it decides to stay." The clock ticked. Each sound became important: the creak of the floor, the hiss of the stove, the slow breathing of strangers sharing the same small shelter. Outside, the wind brushed the eaves with a long, patient sigh. Mara shifted her bag from one hand to the other. Inside it were letters she had never sent, a scarf she had almost left behind, and a photograph folded so many times it felt soft as cloth. She had promised herself she would not look at it again until she was on the train. But the train had not yet come. Elias stepped to the door and opened it just enough to peer out. Snow rushed in immediately, cold and clean. He felt it touch his face, melting against the warmth of his skin. Still no light on the tracks, still no sound of steel or steam. When he closed the door, the waiting room felt warmer than before, as if it were protecting them. "We'll give it time," Elias said gently. "The mountain decides the schedule in weather like this." No one argued. They listened instead, to the snow, to the clock, to the unspoken thought they all shared, but none dared to say, "What if this is the night the train does not make it through?" Outside, the snowfall deepened, layering silence upon silence, burying distance, burying certainty, one quiet moment at a time. Time stretched in the way it does when sleep is close, but not yet willing to arrive. The clock hands crept forward, their movement almost too slow to see. Midnight felt less like a moment and more like a long hallway. Everyone was walking down together, step by careful step. Elias poured hot water into chipped enamel cups, adding tea leaves from a tin that had once been blue. He handed the cups around without ceremony. Warmth passed from hand to hand. Steam rose gently, carrying the quiet scent of herbs and home. "Thank you," Mara said softly, wrapping both palms around her cup. Outside, the wind grew steadier. Snow no longer drifted. It fell, straight and determined, stacking itself on the platform rails, on the signal post, on the roof of the waiting room. The lantern outside dimmed as snow clung to its glass, muting its glow. The postal clerk leaned forward, peering through the window. "I can't even see the bend in the track anymore." "That happens," Elias replied. "First you lose the trees, then the track, then you lose the idea of distance altogether." The older man by the wall smiled faintly at that, as if the words reminded him of something he'd once known well. A sudden sound cut through the stillness, a deep, distant horn. Everyone froze. It came again, faint but unmistakable, carried weakly through layers of snow and forest. Not loud, not confident, but real. The room seemed to exhale all at once. "It's coming," someone whispered. Elias moved to the platform, lifting the signal lamp higher. Snow soaked into his coat immediately. He scanned the darkness beyond the trees, searching for movement, for light, for proof. Minutes passed. The horn did not sound again. Snow piled against the tracks now, filling the grooves, rounding every sharp edge until steel looked soft and unsure. The wind shifted, sending a fresh wave across the platform like a curtain being drawn. Elias felt something he had not felt in years, a quiet doubt. He remembered another winter, long ago, when a train had stopped short of the station and never moved again. They had waited then, too, waited until morning, until the snow made the decision for everyone. Behind him, the door opened just enough for Mara's voice to reach him. "Do you think it can still come through?" Elias didn't answer right away. He watched the snow settle, watched the track disappear beneath it, watched the past and present blur together. "I think," he said carefully, "that the train is doing its best." Mara nodded as if that was enough. When Elias returned inside, the waiting room felt dimmer, quieter. The stove crackled low. Tea cooled untouched in cups. Midnight arrived without announcement. The clock marked it with a soft click. Outside, the snow did not stop. And somewhere beyond the valley, the last train out slowed even further, its wheels turning against a world that was slowly, patiently closing in. By the time anyone noticed, the rails were gone, not broken, not bent, simply covered. Snow had filled the spaces between the ties and risen above the steel, smoothing the path into a pale, unbroken line. Where the track once guided movement and direction, there was now only a suggestion of where it used to be. Elias stood at the window, his breath fogging the glass. He had seen heavy snow before, storms that slowed trains, storms that delayed mail and patience alike. But this was different. This was the kind of snowfall that erased decisions. He reached for the shovel kept by the door and stepped onto the platform. The wind greeted him immediately, cold and insistent, pressing snow into his coat seams. He cleared a small section of rail near the station, scraping metal free with steady, practiced strokes. Steel emerged briefly, dark and wet. Within minutes, snow reclaimed it. Inside, the others watched in silence. No one offered to help. They understood instinctively that this was something Elias needed to do alone. When he returned, he leaned the shovel against the wall and removed his gloves slowly, flexing his fingers. "It's drifting too fast," he said. "Even if the train reaches the bend, it won't see the station." The words settled gently but firmly. The older woman placed her knitting back into her bag, finishing the gesture she had paused earlier. The postal clerk folded his gloves and slid them into his coat pocket. Mara lowered herself onto the bench for the first time. Her bag rested at her feet now, no longer held ready. "What happens," she asked, "if it doesn't come?" Elias refilled the stove and closed its door with care. "Then the valley keeps you," he said, "just for a while." The wind rattled the windows, but the waiting room held. Its walls creaked, adjusting to the cold as if the building itself were settling into endurance. Outside, the lantern's light grew faint, nearly swallowed by white. Snow covered the station sign until only the last letters were visible. Wood. Ravenwood had always been a place you passed through. Tonight, it became a place you stayed. Elias glanced at the clock. Time had stopped feeling useful. Minutes and hours lost their edges, blending into the steady rhythm of snow falling and breath rising. Somewhere in the distance, metal groaned, a sound carried strangely through the storm. Elias closed his eyes briefly, imagining the train inching forward, wheels slipping, engine laboring, doing its best. Inside the waiting room, the stove glowed brighter. Tea was reheated. Coats were loosened. Silence deepened, but it was no longer tense. It was the silence of acceptance beginning to form. Outside, the snow continued its quiet work, burying the path out of the valley, layer by patient layer. The storm did not rage. It endured. Snow fell with a steady confidence now, as if it had decided this valley was where it belonged. The wind softened, not calming but focusing, pressing flakes gently against the station walls and windows until the building felt wrapped, insulated from the rest of the world. Inside, night deepened. Elias dimmed the overhead lamp, leaving only the stove's glow and the faint light from the snow-bright windows. Shadows stretched long and slow across the floorboards, moving almost imperceptibly as the fire breathed. The older man shifted on the bench and cleared his throat. "We'll need to conserve wood," he said, not as a worry, just a fact. Elias nodded. "We will." The postal clerk removed his cap and rested it beside him. Without realizing it, he had stopped watching the clock. His shoulders lowered, the tension easing out of them the way cold leaves when warmth finally settles in. Mara leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed. She listened, not for the train anymore, but for the smaller sounds. The stove ticking as it cooled and warmed again, the soft brush of snow sliding from the roof. Someone breathing deeply in sleep's first approach. It felt strange how quickly the waiting turned into staying. Elias took a seat near the door, his back straight, his hands folded. This was the moment he knew well, when people realized the night would be long, and the best thing to do was meet it calmly. He spoke quietly. "By morning, the plows will reach the ridge. They always do. Trains wait. Valleys don't disappear." No one answered, but the words landed gently. Outside, the track was now completely gone beneath the snow. If you hadn't known it was there, you would never have guessed. The valley looked ancient again, untouched, undecided by human plans. The lantern outside finally dimmed and went dark, its light swallowed entirely. Darkness did not rush in to replace it. Snow reflected what little light remained, keeping the night soft and gray. One by one, eyes closed. Not sleep yet, just rest. The storm continued its patient work, reshaping the night, sealing the station into a quiet pocket of warmth and waiting. And far away, somewhere beyond the ridge, the last train out came to a gentle stop, its engine idling, its journey paused, listening to the same snow that now covered the world. The deepest part of night arrived without a sound. It was the hour when even thought seemed to move more slowly, when the world narrowed to breath, warmth, and the simple fact of being awake, or not. The waiting room existed in its own small circle of time now, cut gently away from everything else. Elias rose and added one measured piece of wood to the stove. The fire responded with a low glow, no flare, no complaint. He had learned long ago that fires, like people, lasted longer when they weren't pushed. The older couple slept sitting upright, heads tilted slightly toward each other, their hands rested close, not touching, as if closeness itself was enough. The postal clerk lay stretched along the bench, coat pulled up to his chin, his breath slow and even. Mara remained awake. She watched snow slide down the window in soft lines, leaving faint trails that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. Her cup of tea sat untouched beside her, long gone cold. She didn't mind. "There's a sound to it," she said quietly. Elias looked up. "To the snow?" She nodded. "Not falling. Settling." They listened together. It was subtle, a faint whisper, like fabric shifting, like pages being turned far away, the snow adjusting itself, finding its place, deciding what would stay buried and what would rise again in the morning. "This valley changes people," Elias said after a while, "or it teaches them to notice." Mara smiled faintly, her eyes still on the glass. "I think," she said, "I've been rushing for a long time." Outside, the station roof carried the weight without protest. Snow curved along its edges, rounding the building until it looked smaller, older, like it had always belonged here. The clock ticked on, unbothered by schedules or departures. Elias felt the familiar ache in his knees, the quiet reminder of years spent standing watch in weather like this. He welcomed it. Pain meant memory. Memory meant continuity. Somewhere beneath all that snow the rails waited, not lost, just resting. The night held steady, neither threatening nor promising, just being what it was, long, quiet, and patient. And inside the waiting room, surrounded by strangers who no longer felt like strangers at all, the storm did its work gently, teaching stillness one moment at a time. Sleep arrived softly, the way snow settles on a window ledge, without anyone noticing the exact moment it happened. The stove glowed low and steady, its warmth spreading in slow waves across the room. Shadows barely moved now. Even the clock seemed quieter, its ticking softened by layers of night. The postal clerk dreamed first. In his dream the train moved again, but not along rails. It glided across open fields, leaving no tracks behind. Letters lifted from his satchel and floated into the air, unfolding themselves before drifting down gently into waiting hands. No one hurried. No one asked when the next delivery would come. Across the room, the older woman dreamed of her first winter in the valley. She was young again, her fingers quick with yarn, her laughter louder. Snow piled high outside, but the house was warm, full of light. When she woke briefly, she reached for her husband's sleeve just to confirm what the dream had already told her. Mara rested with her eyes closed, not fully asleep, drifting between thoughts. Memories rose and faded without weight. Places she had left, words she had carried too long. For the first time in months she felt no need to decide anything. Elias remained awake. He always did. He watched over the room the way he had watched over the station for decades, not guarding, not controlling, simply witnessing. He knew these hours well. This was when the valley breathed the slowest, when even storms seemed to pause and listen. Outside, snow slid from the roof in a low, muffled sigh. Elias smiled faintly at the sound. The building shifted, settled deeper into the ground beneath it. He thought of the train crew, likely resting now wherever the storm had stopped them. He imagined their own stove, their own quiet circle of light, different walls, same night. The storm had not trapped them, he realized. It had gathered them. The waiting room felt less like a place of delay and more like a shared shelter, something ancient and necessary. When Elias finally closed his eyes, it was only for a moment. Even then he listened, to the fire, to the sleepers, to the snow outside arranging the world into something simpler. Morning would come, it always did. But for now, night was enough. Morning did not arrive with light, it arrived with change. The air inside the waiting room felt different, less tight, less expectant. The fire had burned down to a quiet bed of coals, still warm, still faithful. Breath no longer fogged the air as strongly. Somewhere deep in the valley, the storm loosened its grip. Elias noticed it first, as he always did. He opened the door just a crack. Cold slipped in, but it was gentler now. The snowfall had thinned, flakes drifting instead of driving. The world outside was no longer moving downward, it was resting. Snow lay everywhere, deep and smooth, untouched by wind. The platform steps were buried completely. The track was gone without a trace, as if it had never existed. Behind him, someone stirred. The postal clerk sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, unsure at first where he was. The older man shifted, then smiled faintly when he saw his wife still beside him. Mara opened her eyes and remained still, listening. "It's quieter," she said. "Yes," Elias replied. "The storm's finished, saying what it needed to say." He stepped fully outside this time, boots sinking deep with each step. The sky was a pale gray, not yet morning, not quite night. Snow reflected everything, making the valley glow softly, like a held breath. No horn, no engine, no movement, but the slow settling of snow. When Elias returned inside, he brushed snow from his coat and began tending the stove again. The simple routine grounded the room back into waking life. "So," the postal clerk asked, careful not to sound disappointed, "no train?" Elias shook his head gently. "Not today." The words landed without weight. No one protested. No one hurried to stand. The idea of leaving felt distant now, less urgent than it had the night before. Mara reached for her bag but did not open it. "I think," she said, "I can wait." Elias met her eyes and nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. Outside, the valley rested beneath its white covering, quiet and complete. Morning would take its time uncovering it. Inside the station, the day began slowly, as all good days in winter should. Morning work began without instruction. Elias fetched the shovel again, setting it by the door where everyone could see it. He didn't ask for help. He didn't need to. After a few quiet moments, the postal clerk stood, pulled on his gloves, and picked it up. "I'll start with the steps," he said. The older man joined him soon after, moving carefully, testing the depth with each step. The women stayed inside, tending the stove, pouring water to warm, folding blankets that had been shared in the night. No roles were assigned, yet everything found its place. Outside, the snow was deep, deeper than any storm in recent memory. Each shovelful lifted clean and heavy, making a soft, satisfying sound as it landed aside. Breath rose in pale clouds. Muscles warmed slowly. They worked without hurry. There was no schedule to meet now, no train to catch, only the quiet goal of making the station livable again, one small cleared space at a time. Mara watched through the window, her reflection faintly overlapping the scene outside. She felt a strange tenderness for the moment, as if she were watching something fragile and rare. By mid-morning, the steps reappeared. The platform edge emerged as a gentle line beneath the snow. The track, still buried farther out, remained untouched, resting beneath its white cover like something asleep. Elias paused, leaning on his shovel, surveying their progress. "That's enough for today," he said calmly. "The rest can wait." No one argued. They returned inside, stamping snow from boots, shedding coats. The stove welcomed them back with its steady warmth. Someone laughed quietly, not at anything in particular, just at the simple relief of being warm again. Outside, the valley stayed silent. The train would not come today, but life, quietly, already had. The day unfolded the way winter days often do, slowly, with no sharp edges. Light filtered through the snow-bright windows, never becoming true sunlight, just a steady glow that made the room feel gently awake. The waiting room no longer felt like a place meant only for passing through. It had become something temporary but complete, like a cabin found during a long walk. Elias opened the small cupboard beneath the counter and took stock. Bread wrapped in cloth, a jar of preserves, dried beans. Enough for now. "We'll make soup," he said simply. No one asked what kind. Soup in winter was always the same thing, warmth gathered into a bowl. Mara helped slice bread at the narrow table, her movements careful, unhurried. The older woman stirred the pot, pausing now and then to adjust the fire. The postal clerk sat nearby, repairing a loose seam in his glove with needle and thread borrowed from someone's pocket. Outside, the world remained still. Snow clung to tree branches, bending them low, turning the forest into a quiet cathedral of white. No tracks marked the ground, not animal, not human. It was as if the valley had asked for one full day of rest. Elias watched the steam rise from the pot and felt something settle inside him. Stations were built for motion, for arrival and departure. But he had learned over the years that their true purpose appeared only when movement stopped. When they ate, no one spoke much. The soup was plain and perfect. Each spoonful warmed more than hands and stomachs. It warmed patience. Mara found herself smiling without knowing why. The train was no longer late. It was simply not coming. And in that absence, the day found room to exist on its own terms. After the meal, the room settled again, not into sleep this time, but into the gentle looseness that comes when no one needs anything immediately. The older man spoke first. He told a short story about a winter long ago when the river froze so hard that wagons crossed where boats once drifted. He didn't embellish it. He didn't need to. The story was small, held together by simple facts and the memory of cold hands and shared work. Mara listened closely. She noticed how the story did not try to teach anything. It simply existed, the way moments do when they have already done their work. The postal clerk followed with a story of his own, about his first delivery route, how he'd gotten lost only 2 streets from home, and discovered a bakery he had never noticed before. He laughed softly at himself, shaking his head. Elias shared last. He spoke of the station itself, how it had once been louder, busier, full of voices and footsteps, how storms like this used to come every few years, not once in a decade. He spoke without sadness, only observation. "Places remember," he said, "even when people forget." The stove popped quietly, punctuating the silence between words. Outside, the snow held steady, unchanged. Inside, time passed without measurement. No one checked the clock. No one wondered what hour it was. The stories ended naturally, not with conclusions, but with quiet nods, as if everyone understood that the telling itself had been enough. The waiting room returned to stillness, richer now, layered with voices that would linger long after the snow melted. Sometime after midday, sound returned. It was subtle at first, a distant crack, like ice shifting far away. Then another. The valley was waking, stretching carefully after its long stillness. Elias noticed the change in the air. Cold remained, but it no longer pressed inward. The sky lightened slightly, and the gray above the valley softened toward blue. Outside, a bird landed on the edge of the platform railing, shaking snow from its wings before settling. It tilted its head, listening, then flew off toward the trees. Mara stood at the door watching. "It feels like permission," she said, "to move again." "Yes," Elias agreed, "but slowly." They returned to work in small ways, clearing another narrow path, shaking snow from coats, opening the door a little wider to let fresh air in. The track remained buried beyond the station, but closer in, its shape began to show through. a faint suggestion beneath the snow. The postal clerk paused and smiled. "I can see where it runs now." "Good," Elias said. "That means it's still there." The storm had not erased anything. It had only hidden it, asking for patience in return. As afternoon drifted on, the valley no longer felt sealed. It felt held. And far beyond the ridge, the train crew would be receiving the same signs, the quiet permission to prepare, to wait for the right moment, not to rush. The last train out had not been lost. It had simply been taught how to stop. By late afternoon, the light changed again. It slanted gently through the clouds, casting faint shadows across the snow for the first time since the storm began. The valley looked new, as if it had been carefully reset. Elias stepped outside and made the first clear footprint beyond the platform. The snow held its shape, crisp and clean. He waited a moment, then took another step. The others followed, not all at once, leaving a small pattern of human movement where there had been none. No one went far. There was no need. The simple act of stepping outside felt significant enough. Mara walked to the edge of the platform and stopped. She looked back at the station, the worn boards, the quiet windows, the faint curl of smoke rising from the chimney. "This place," she said softly, "doesn't ask much." "No," Elias replied, "just attention." They stood together, watching the valley breathe. Snow slid from tree branches in slow, graceful falls. Somewhere unseen, water began to move again beneath ice. The older couple turned back first, hands brushing. The postal clerk lingered a moment longer, then followed. Mara remained outside until the cold gently reminded her to return. When she stepped back inside, she closed the door with care. The footprints remained, small, ordinary proof that people had been there not to conquer the snow, but to pass through it respectfully. Evening returned the way a familiar coat does, quietly, without surprise. The light faded from the valley in soft layers, turning shadows blue, then gray, then barely there at all. Inside the station, Elias lit the lamp again, its glow warmer now against the settled calm of the day. Supper was simpler than before, leftover soup warmed slowly, bread torn, not cut. No one felt especially hungry, but eating felt right, another small marker of time passing as it should. Outside, the snow held firm. It no longer fell, and it no longer shifted. It simply was. The footprints from earlier remained visible, edges still sharp, like a memory not yet softened. Mara sat near the window, watching the sky darken. "I don't mind," she said, mostly to herself. Elias nodded. He understood what she meant. There were nights that demanded movement and nights that invited stillness. This one was the latter. The postal clerk wrote a short note by lamplight, updating a route log he knew wouldn't be read for days. The older woman finished her mitten at last, tying off the yarn with a satisfied motion. The station settled into itself again, not waiting this time, just being present. Beyond the ridge, engines rested, schedules shifted, life adjusted quietly, without argument. And as night returned to Ravenwood Station, it did so without urgency, wrapping the building in a calm that felt earned. The second night felt different from the first. There was no tension in it, no listening for distant horns or counting minutes against a clock. Night arrived as a familiar presence now, something that belonged to them rather than something to be endured. The stove burned steadily, fed with care. Elias adjusted it once, then left it alone. He had learned that warmth, like trust, lasted longer when it wasn't constantly tested. The postal clerk slept quickly this time, stretched out with an ease that surprised him. The older couple settled side by side on the bench, a shared blanket tucked neatly around their legs. Their breathing found the same rhythm it had followed for decades. Mara stayed awake a little longer. She opened her bag at last and took out the folded photograph. She did not study it closely. She only acknowledged it, then placed it back gently, as if it no longer needed guarding. Outside, the valley lay quiet beneath the stars, the snow reflecting faint light upward. The storm had passed, but its work remained, holding the world still just a little longer. Elias sat near the door, listening. This night did not ask questions. It offered rest. And in that rest, the station felt complete. No departures, no arrivals, only the quiet continuation of being. Morning arrived more confidently this time. Light pushed through the windows in pale bands, sharper than before, touching the edges of the room as if checking that everything was still there. The air felt lighter, less held. Elias opened the door wide. Cold flowed in, clean and bright, carrying with it the faintest distant sound, metal against metal, far away and careful. Not a horn, not yet, but movement. The postal clerk heard it too and smiled without standing. "That sounds like work beginning," he said. Outside, the snow no longer hid everything. Along the track's path, subtle lines had appeared, shadows, where the rails rested beneath the white. The valley had not released them completely, but it was loosening its grip. They ate quietly, packed their things slowly. No one rushed to be ready, because readiness had stopped meaning departure alone. Mara stepped outside and took a long breath. She felt steadier than she had in months, as if the stillness had rearranged something inside her and put it back where it belonged. Elias watched the sky. "By tomorrow," he said, "the way out will show itself." No one asked if they would be on the train when it did. Some paths, they now knew, waited until you were done waiting. Late morning carried a new rhythm into the valley. At first it was almost nothing. A dull, repeating knock carried faintly through the cold air. Elias paused with his cup halfway to his lips and listened. He smiled before anyone else noticed. "Plows," he said, "working their way down." The sound came and went, never loud, never close. It wasn't meant to hurry anyone. It was simply proof that the world beyond the valley still existed and was slowly remembering this place again. Outside, the snow no longer felt endless. It had weight now, texture, edges. The footprints from yesterday had softened, but not disappeared, their outlines rounding gently as time passed over them. Mara sat on the platform step, wrapped in her shawl, watching light sparkle across the snow. "It's strange," she said. "I thought leaving was what I needed most." "And now?" Elias asked. She considered the question carefully. "Now I think I needed to stop first." The postal clerk stepped outside and tested the snow with his boot. "Another day," he said. "Maybe two." "Yes," Elias agreed, "and that's all right." The station no longer felt like a pause between places. It felt like a chapter that belonged exactly where it was. The sound of shovels continued somewhere beyond sight, steady, patient, unremarkable, the kind of work that changes things without announcing itself. By afternoon, the valley offered a small miracle, quiet and practical. Elias knelt near the edge of the platform and brushed snow away with his gloved hand. Beneath it, a thin line of steel appeared, dark and cold, catching the light. He did not clear more than that. One line was enough. "The rails are breathing," he said. The words carried a gentle relief, not excitement. Breathing meant life without urgency. Breathing meant there was time. The postal clerk crouched beside him and nodded. "You can almost hear it," he said, like something stretching after sleep. Mara stood back, watching the simple act with a calm she hadn't known before. The track did not pull at her anymore. It no longer felt like escape. It felt like option, something that would be there when she was ready. Snow slid softly from the signal post. The lantern glass, once buried, caught daylight again and glimmered faintly. Inside, the station felt lighter, windows clearer, corners less heavy. Even the clock seemed to tick with a steadier confidence. The valley had not finished its work, but it had begun to loosen its hands, and that was enough for today. That evening, as the light thinned and the sky softened once more toward night, the sound finally came. Not loud, not sudden. A distant, familiar breath, steam released gently into cold air. Elias stood before anyone else did. He did not rush. He only turned his head slightly, listening the way he always had. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by the faintest tremor beneath their feet. The train was not arriving yet. It was waiting just beyond the bend, respectful of the valley's pace. Mara felt her chest tighten, then ease. The feeling surprised her. She had imagined this moment would be sharp with urgency, full of decisions. Instead, it felt calm, almost kind. The postal clerk smiled to himself. "So it stayed," he said, "just like we did." "Yes," Elias replied. "Sometimes that's what keeps things whole." They stepped outside together. The snow reflected the deepening blue of evening, the rails now faintly visible in long, patient lines. Far down the track, a soft glow hovered, engine light muted by distance and snow. No whistle sounded. The train did not demand attention. It did not announce rescue or departure. It simply existed there, present, alive, and willing to wait one more night if asked. Elias lifted the signal lamp, not high, not urgently, just enough to be seen. The glow answered back. Inside the valley, stillness and movement finally shared the same space. The final morning arrived quietly, like a promise kept. Light spread across the valley in soft gold and pale blue, touching the snow without waking it too quickly. The rails were visible now, still rimmed with white, but clear enough to guide a train forward. The world had decided gently that it was time. Elias stepped onto the platform before anyone else, the cold familiar beneath his boots. He ran a gloved hand along the signal post, brushing away the last thin crust of snow. When he looked down the track, he could see the engine clearly now, waiting just beyond the bend, steam rising in slow, patient breaths. The others joined him, one by one. No one spoke. There was no rush, no sudden scramble for bags or tickets. Even now, departure did not feel sharp. It felt like a natural next step, the way breathing follows rest. Mara stood with her bag at her side. She did not clutch it. She did not hesitate. She simply waited for the right moment to move. When the train finally rolled in, it did so slowly, respectfully, wheels humming against steel that had rested long enough. Snow shifted beneath its weight, not resisting, only adjusting. The doors opened. Elias tipped his hat, the same gesture he had made 1,000 times before. "Safe travels," he said. The postal clerk boarded first, then the older couple. Mara lingered for just a breath, looking back at the station, the stove smoke curling upward, the worn boards, the place that had held her still when the world insisted on motion. Then she stepped onto the train. The engine exhaled. The cars moved. The valley watched them go, unbothered, complete. As the train disappeared beyond the bend, Elias returned to the platform, shovel in hand, ready to clear the rest of the track, not because he had to, but because it was time. Snow still covered the valley, but nothing was buried anymore.